Hey YouTube, this is PokéCastXVll here, and today we will be discussing the top 10 decks for this year's National Championships. Since the 2015 video proved to be so popular, I figured it was worth following up again with another top 10, as I still keep getting a lot of questions about the current metagame. This year's format will be standard, meaning sets from X and Y all the way up to generations will be legal for competitive play. Fates Collide will be released on the 4th of May, however, it won't be legal here in the UK, as each set needs to allow 21 days for it to be used in tournaments. If you'd like a brief rundown as to what the National Championships are, be sure to check out my video from 2015.
It's important to remember that this video is again a collaboration with the guys from ProPokemon, and if you'd like to check out articles to further your game, be sure to check them out at www.propokemon.com. We'll leave a link in the description if you'd like to check them out. The final thing to say is that this video is purely hypothetical, and it's been taken from recent results in the US and UK. With all that said, let's begin.
Number 10. At number 10, we have Mega Manectric. Mega Manectric has always been in and around the top tables and has proven to be an extremely consistent deck. Depending on how you choose to build the deck, you can pair Manectric with Jolteon-EX, as having Turbo Bolt allows for a more efficient way of powering up your bench Pokemon. Having Jolteon-EX for its second attack, Flash Ray deals a decent 70 damage and prevents all damage done to Jolteon the next turn by your opponent's basic Pokemon. This is really big against decks like Night March, as all their Night March Pokemon that they're able to attack with are all basics. Where this deck does struggle is countering a lot of the top metagame decks. Even against decks like Yveltal, you do have a tricky time trying to get around Gallade if they're able to get it out. Even with Jolteon, the sheer speed of Night March can be quite difficult to keep up with, considering you do need at least a turn to set up, especially when they're running cards like Puzzle of Time. This allows them to access cards like Escape Rope and Lysander, in where they're easily able to take a KO on your low 160 HP Jolteon. As we'll touch on later, a lot of the top tier decks in the format are currently evolutions, meaning the prize exchange is going to be unfavourable if you are getting two-shotted by a non-EX. Certainly a consistent deck, but we'll have to wait and see if it makes an impact at this year's National Championships. Number 9.
At number 9 on the list, we've got straight Vespiquen. This is another deck that's been playable since its release at the start of this season. As Vespiquen relies on playing lots of Pokemon that you can discard for extra damage, you can choose to include Pokemon like Baby Yveltal, Zoroark, EX or Jolteon that are only useful in certain situations because you can just discard them the rest of the time with Battle Compressor. With most Vespiquen decks playing almost half their deck as Pokemon, you have plenty of Pokemon to discard, and this lets you hit for big damage later on in the game. Vespiquen has the added bonus of hitting popular Pokemon like SEISMITOAD-EX, Greninja and WAILORD-EX all for weakness, which significantly helps you to beat those decks. However, Vespiquen is a non-EX deck that tries to hit for high amounts of damage for a double colourless energy attachment, and a lot of the time it's just an inferior version of Night March which deals higher damage much more quickly and doesn't have to rely on evolving into a stage 1 Pokemon. With Vespiquen struggling around its consistency due to playing so many Pokemon and having lackluster matchups against a lot of the top decks on this list, we've had to leave straight Vespiquen down at number 9.
Number 8.
Next on the list, coming in at number 8, are SEISMITOAD variants. This includes Straight Toad, Toad Slowking, and Toad Tina, sometimes with Slowking too. SEISMITOAD is a deck which has been around for quite a while, and for good reason too. With the ability to item lock your opponent for a single DCE attachment, your opponent can be left with no attacking options, allowing you to sweep the game alongside other disruption cards such as Flare Grunt and Zoroark. SEISMITOAD also has partners which help to aid this disruption, such as Slowking, which with its ability can allow you, on a coin flip of course, to move energy from your opponent's active Pokemon away to a useless attacker on the bench, such as something like Hooper-EX or Shaman-EX, which are predominantly used for their abilities. Or you can go for consistency with Straight Toad and do well, as proven by the second place finisher at the European Challenge Cup. The issue with Toad at the moment, and the reason it isn't higher on the list, is that while the item lock is very nice, your opponent will always have a guaranteed one turn of items, as you can't go first and use Quake and Punch in the same turn. In comparison to Trevenant and Vespiquen Vileplume, which are able to do this, SEISMITOAD just isn't the wrecking force it once was. Matchup wise, it also doesn't look very strong. Greninja is tough, as Rough Seas can soak up your weak damage output, and multiple copies of Jirachi can steamroll through your double colourless energies, which are not only played in Greninja but other decks too, forcing you to either have 2 basic energy or to just pass and break the item lock. Wailord is very difficult for the same reasons, and Vespiquen, as mentioned earlier, hits you for weakness, which is an unfavourable prize trade for the deck. The main reason Toad is on the list, however, and not to be forgotten by any means, is the fact that unlike most decks in the format, Toad has a good Night March matchup. And by good I mean very favourable. With Fighting Fury Belt, Night March is unable to one-hit KO you, and you can discard all of their double colourless energies, item lock them, and leave them literally unable to attack once their 4 energy are gone, simply because they can't use Puzzle of Time under item lock. Another option is to play SEISMITOAD in a deck which plays double colourless energy already, as a splashable tech, for example in YVELTAL to help out in the Night March matchup. So if you're expecting a lot of Night March, then maybe this could be the deck for you.
Number 7. Moving on, at number 7 we have Wailord. With a massive 250 HP, Wailord, much like its success last year at the US National Championships, is piloted very similar in where it aims to deck your opponent out by simply passing turn. Amongst the deck, you have several cards that help disrupt your opponent in the process, such as Crushing Hammer, Team Flare Grunt, Xerosic, Headringer, and Trick Shovel, to name a few. With that, you also run a variety of Pokemon to stall out your opponent further, such as Giratina-EX for Mega Pokemon, and Aegislash-EX if they are heavily reliant on special energy cards, Night March being a prime example. Other techs you can also include are cards such as Dedenne if they decide to go down the Yveltal route of piling up a load of energy on an Yveltal-EX, and Lucario-EX with 2 basic fighting energy to knock out opposing Bunnelbees. With the loss of Hue due to the expanded format, the basic energies can also be used with Durant from Flash Fire, as its attack, Chip Off, forces your opponent to discard cards from their hand until they only have 4 cards remaining. This prevents your opponents from trying to play resourcefully by building up a large hand and then using something like a Judge or a Shauna to put them back into the deck. Finally, what makes this deck so good is cards like AZ, Cassius, Max Potion, and Rough Seas, all cards that prevent your opponents from being able to KO your Wailords. However, what keeps Wailord from hitting our top spots are cards like Vespiquen. Vespiquen, for a single double colourless energy, can easily one-shot your Wailord if there are enough Pokemon in the discard pile. Another matchup that it struggles with a lot is Greninja, as having multiple Greninja breaks can also one-shot your Wailords. Above all, time management can also be your worst enemy. In a tournament where you are capped at 50 minutes for an entire match, it's unlikely that you'll win 2 games playing Wailord. However, if you do lose the first match, it can also be quite difficult to recover from. The same applies to Top Cut, where if time has been called and your opponent has taken at least 4 prize cards, then they'll automatically be awarded the victory for that game. Certainly a high risk, high reward deck, but will it feature at this year's National Championships? We'll just have to wait and find out. Number 6. At number 6, we have Mega Rayquaza and Jolteon. Mega Rayquaza has been in and around the format for a while and has even topped our list for the 2015 National Championships. But what changes do we make to the deck this time around? The concept is pretty much the same in where you use Skyfield to allow up to 8 Pokemon on your bench at once. With that, you can also Ultra Ball for Hooper-EX, searching out 3 more EX Pokemon and quickly start filling up your bench. Your main target, other than setting up Mega Rayquaza, will be getting out multiple Shaman EXs to draw through your deck much quicker. At best, this deck can hit 240 damage in a single turn. The inclusion of Jolteon EX allows you to tackle decks like Night March, and as mentioned before, all of their Night Marches that they can attack with are basic Pokemon, which is where a deck like Rayquaza generally struggles with. It's also important to mention that you do play the Dragon Rayquaza EX over the colourless version just because of the weakness difference. Again, where this deck can struggle is with the sheer speed of decks like Night March. Even if you are keeping up with the pace of the game, the prize exchange isn't favourable for you as the Mega Rayquaza player, as they are KOing your EX and taking 2 prizes of a single energy, while you're only taking 1 in the process and needing 3 energy to respond. You can also choose to go down the Jolteon EX route, however this does require 2 turns to power up. If you choose to, you could possibly switch Mega Turbo with Max Elixir, although this could be extremely risky when you're only playing around 4 basic energy. Cards like Toad can also be a pain to deal with, especially if they lock you out of energy acceleration, with cards like Mega Turbo and getting hammered in the process. And finally, knocking off your stadium not only caps you at 150 damage, but also means you have to fill up your bench once more. Another deck that I certainly expect to feature at this year's Nationals, but is it able to go all the way? We'll have to wait and see. Number 5.
At number 5 we have everyone's favourite deck to go second against, Vespiquen Vileplume, a deck which has become very well known only recently since Andrew Wambot piloted the deck. Going first with this deck is absolutely huge, as you aim to essentially search through your entire deck turn 1, set up ideally 2 Vespiquen, a Vileplume with a float stone, have energies on the field and in hand, and enough Pokemon in the discard to knock out most Pokemon. The deck typically plays around 28 Pokemon, give or take a couple, so any Pokemon it no longer needs it dumps with Battle Compressor to boost Vespiquen's B-Revenge damage. The deck is very much a glass cannon however, as if it goes second your opponent will get a turn of items guaranteed. Also, Hex Maniac can shut down your Vileplume for a turn to use items, or if your opponent goes first your entire setup will be hindered, as this deck relies on 4 Unknown and 4 Shaymin-EX to set up turn 1. Plus, if you whiff anything during your turn 1 setup such as the Vileplume or even a Floatstone before you evolve, your opponent can just Lysander it up and leave you with no energy left to retreat it, until you eventually deck out, although there is a chance you can AZ. However, if you do win the coin flip and setup, you quickly become the heavy favourite to win the set. A single copy of AG/EX will also auto-win against this deck once it hits the field, as this deck only plays 4 double colourless energy, and thus there's no way to get around the ability. You could however tech in a Hex Maniac, but in a deck like this it's very counterproductive, as you don't want to turn off your own abilities. 90% of matchups will most likely be decided by who wins the coin flip.
Number 4.
Coming in at number 4 is a deck you'll all be familiar with, YVELTAL. This deck has been playable since YVELTAL-EX's release all the way back in the X and Y set, and it's still very strong in standard. While most builds play Zoroark and the Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick and Gallade combination, most deck lists are considerably different to each other. Some still run high counts of Baby YVELTAL from the X and Y set to help beat Night March, others focus on cards like Acrobike and Unknown in order to maximise their chance of being able to use Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick for Gallade, and in the past few weeks some players managed to win various state championships using a build that had Zoroark Break and no YVELTAL-EX. YVELTAL's main strengths are that it's consistent, it's still strong going second, and that it has a chance against almost every single deck on this list. In particular, it has a very favourable matchup against Trevenant, which would usually be pretty straightforward thanks to your Darkness typing. Even decks like Mega Manectric, which would usually one-hit KO YVELTAL-EX due to weakness, are now okay, thanks to Gallade, which is also a strong attacker in its own right. One of YVELTAL's downfalls is that without the help of Hypnotoxic Laser and Dark Patch from Expanded, its damage output is a lot weaker in Standard. Also, it's near impossible to use Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick for Gallade going second when you're already under item lock from a Trevenant or Vileplume. Nonetheless, expect to see a lot of people playing YVELTAL at Nationals.
Number 3.
Greninja is our choice for number 3, which is considerably higher than results from state championships suggest. It's taken a long time for players to figure out how best to play this deck, and a recent build that uses cards such as Jirachi and Ace Trainer to slow the opponent down while setting up multiple Greninja on the field seems to be the best. Provided it can draw well and hit the turn 1 volley, meaning you can end your turn with 4 Frogadier on the field, there isn't any deck you should be afraid of playing against. Once you have multiple Greninja Break on the field, you can hit for huge numbers each turn and take 2 prizes from a Shaymin-EX knockout with 2 lots of 60 damage snipe before you even attack for your turn. If Greninja set up consistently in every game like it can do, it would probably be our number 1 choice on this list. Unfortunately, that is rarely the case, and it frequently draws badly and just gets overrun by the opponent. In the current metagame with decks like Night March, Vespiquen, Vileplume or Trevenant, where they're so popular, you need an explosive turn 1 to keep up with them, because otherwise they'll just leave you for dead. Nationals will be using best of 3 Swiss, which does help, as you can lose one game due to drawing dead and win the other 2, but that's still a lot of pressure to put on you in this deck. When playing with limited time, be sure to know when you should concede unwinnable games when you have a slow start, to save time for the 2 games you can win.
Number 2.
Moving ever closer to the number 1 spot comes one of my favourite decks in the format, and that deck is Trevenant. While this deck does lose Jirachi-EX from Expanded, it does run a lot of support to help you get out that turn 1 Trevenant. When Trevenant is in play, Forest Curse, its ability, prevents your opponent from playing any item cards from his or her hand, When you consider cards like SEISMITOAD-EX gives your opponent at least one turn of items, Trevenant, if going first, can lock your opponent before they've even had a turn themselves. So the strategy is relatively simple. By using cards like Trainer's Mail, Ultra Ball and Shaymin-EX, you're digging through your deck for one of your 4 Wallies, which allows you to evolve one of your Pokemon, even if it's only been put into play that turn. Where this deck differs from last year is the added bonus of Trevenant Break, which not only bumps up your HP to 160 HP, but also has a nice attack for a Psychic and single colourless energy, doing a 30 snipe across the board, made easier to use by Dimension Valley. Another thing worth mentioning is that the Phantom released in Breakpoint does have a nice attack. Ascension for a single colourless allows you to search your deck for a card that evolves from this Pokemon, in this case your item lock Trevenant. Again, this is made easier by having a single energy or Dimension Valley. Keep in mind that if you are going first, you can't attack, leaving Wally your only out to getting out Trevenant. You can also choose to run Burst Balloons as a great way of tackling decks such as Night March with low HP, or even preventing big EXs from attacking, as they'll be accumulating damage in the process. Again, what makes this deck so powerful is the turn 1 item lock. However, there are some flaws to the deck. If your opponent opens up with the turn 1 Lysander, they can break the item lock if you have another bench Pokemon. Even under item lock, this deck does struggle a lot with Yveltal. As Trevenant is weak to Dark, stacking up a Yveltal-EX can one-shot your Trevenant Break. With decks that run rough seas such as Greninja, accumulating damage can also be tough when it's being healed off immediately after. Otherwise, that pretty much concludes Trevenant for this year. It's certainly a deck I would be prepared for if you're thinking about going to Nationals this year.
Number 1. And finally, the big number 1, and at first place it should come of no surprise that we have Night March. If you would like a breakdown of how the deck's piloted, be sure to check out my Night March discussion upload. There'll also be a link in the annotations at the end of this video if you would like to check it out. In terms of the matchups though, Night March has everything going for it. You can cover 2 typings through Pumpkaboo and Joltik, and it doesn't have much difficulty hitting a turn 1 180, knocking out most EXs within the format. This deck does also gain Fighting Fury Belt and Puzzle of Time, all covered in the discussion if you would like more information of how it functions. More importantly, it's arguably the fastest deck within the format. Even against decks like Greninja and Bats, you have Hex Maniac, which prevents your Night Marches from being easily picked off. Arguably, if set up, Jolteon-EX can give this deck trouble. However, with an Escape Rope and Lysander, it's easily countered. While this might be difficult to obtain both at once, especially if you're only playing 1 copies of each, it can be battle compressed and then revived through Puzzle of Time. Again, all the weaknesses of the deck are covered within my previous upload. However, the major weakness of this deck is getting around decks like Vileplume and Trevenant, where they can open up with a turn 1 item lock. This deck is a heavily item based deck, and being locked out of things like Trainer's Mail, Battle Compressor and Puzzle of Time can hurt you immensely. Night March is certainly a deck that I'm expecting a lot of at Nationals, and if you are going, then I would strongly advise doing a lot of testing against this deck, as I fully expect it to feature a lot. And that for this year concludes our top 10 list for this year's National Championships. Above all, it leaves me to say that if you are attending this year, then be sure to get in a lot of testing beforehand, and above all, have fun. Nationals is a great opportunity to meet people from all over the country, travelling specifically to participate, and regardless of where you finish up, it's always a really fun event to go to. Again, if you'd like to check out ProPokemon, there'll be a link in the description box below. So that leaves me to say thank you very much for watching if you have got this far, and I will see you all next time.